time is valuable. I want to say thank you to everyone who's joining us remotely from wherever you are in the world. And a special thanks to our illustrious panelist group from ATKG. ATKG is both my personal and our corporate tax accounting and practice. We've been a great, really appreciate their partnership over the last, gosh, I can't even count how many years. But since 1982, ATKG has specialized in tax accounting, assurance, and advisory services for a select, and how I'm part of this, I don't know, client base of closely held businesses and large family groups. They're a hands-on firm, which is why I love them, that's built a business around the entire client experience, not just the result. And on that panel, we have a great team. We've got AJ Sturm, who heads their ATKG's assurance group. We've got Allison Miller, CPA and senior manager, who heads up the federal tax group. I'm excited about what Allison has to share with us today. And last but certainly not least is Diane White, CPA and senior manager, and leads the resource management group, sales and training. So guys, I want to thank you so much for joining us on our first joint webinar, where we talk a little bit about the end of year 2020 and 2021 and beyond. In addition, you'll see 3 Iron Edge team members up there. One of them is unfortunately not with us today due to a last-minute family emergency, but you're lucky enough to have me, Ryan Lakin. I'm president and CEO of Iron Edge Group, and more importantly, Andrew Moore, who's our chief operating officer. Andrew has oversight on all things operational, sales, and marketing here at Iron Edge, and honestly is my right-hand man, which I guess I could have jumped into some Hamilton soundtrack right then, but I'll save everyone from my horrible singing. Andrew, why don't you start us off? You're controlling the slides. What are we jumping into today?
So today we're going to talk about the end of year, and we're going to get into planning for the 2021 fiscal year and for operations and for basically your business, right? So if you're a business owner, if you're in a position to be a leader within your organization, our goal today is to bring you up to speed on the components of what we believe from the accounting side of the house, from ATKG, of things you need to be considerate of, thoughtful of, and then from a security, IT, and an operations standpoint, kind of things that organizations should be considering as folks are remote or coming back into the office, or kind of a little bit of both. So we're going to hand it over to Diane to go through some stuff regarding what I think is the most important issue that we will discuss today, or most prescient, I guess, is the presidential election and kind of what that means for your organization, and kind of what happens if, let's be honest, when we did this run through with Diane last week, we were hoping today we'd be able to pick a road. Like, this is what a Biden administration is going to look like, or this is what a Trump administration is going to look like. As of 20 minutes ago, and I was downstairs, there is no clear victor yet. So I think we should, I guess Diane has the opportunity to talk about both. So Darren, why don't you give us a little bit of information about what you think organizations need to be looking at based on what administrative changes might be coming down from the accounting side of the house?
Yeah, definitely. We thought maybe there was a chance we would know who would be our next president. But unfortunately, although we still planned, knowing that 2020 has been a fun year, so we're planning to give you information on both. So we actually, as CPAs and just individually, have all gone through a huge tax reform in 2017. At the end of the 2017, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, and that was under President Trump's administration. So his platform is pretty similar to kind of what everybody's experiencing now. And so his positions, as far as they are relating to taxes, is just to continue on everything he's been doing and have kind of a 2.0 Tax Cut and Jobs Act. And so his position would also to include cutting middle class taxes about 15%. So he wants to extend that and cut those down a little bit more. Certain high income taxpayers pay capital gains rates at 20% instead of 15%, and he wants that to be 15% for all. So his platform is just to extend what we're already doing and maybe cut some tax rates here and there. Biden, on the other hand, is obviously significantly different. So his platform right now, and of course, there's a lot of things that play into this. You know, we need to see how the House and the Senate play out. But really, his platform is majority increasing tax rates. So we used to have a 39.7% highest tax rate, and now it's 37%. He wants to bump that back up. Most taxpayers or wage earners cap out at a Social Security tax at about $137,000. He wants to bring that back in if you have wages above $400,000. So increasing Social Security tax on high wage earners. He wants to limit itemized deductions. Many business owners, as part of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, have experienced a pass-through deduction. It's this magical deduction to some certain industries of business owners and gives you a little bit extra off your tax rate. He wants to do away with that. He wants to take the corporate tax rate and move it from 21% to 28%. And the corporate tax rate is the lowest it's been almost ever. So he wants to increase that amount. He wants to do extensive reform with estate planning, which is something we're keeping our eyes on right now. The estate individual lifetime exemption is one of the highest, if not the highest it's ever been. It's at 11.5 million. Essentially, so if you pass away and have assets of that amount, you're not going to pay estate tax. He wants to cut that in half. So it kind of encompasses a lot more people into estate tax. Additionally, he wants to take, typically what we've been used to is when you die, or inherit property. So grandpa dies, he bought a farm for $10,000 and he's had it forever, right? And now it's worth $1 million. Usually your heirs get a step up to the basis at date of death. Biden wants to do away with that step up. So now you're inheriting property from grandpa and it's worth $1 million and you only have basis of 10,000. So meaning if you turn around and sell that property, historically, you would just not pay any taxes. Under Biden's plan, you're essentially going to have to pay tax on that full amount minus whatever your basis is. So that coupled with potential increase to capital gains rates, from 15% to ordinary rates, there's some extensive changes that could occur if Biden's elected. So we're just kind of keeping our eyes and ears open and planning for our situation now and what we think it's going to be in the future.
So there was somebody who was telling me that they think that they live up in Centerville, and they were saying that there was a lot of people around them, a lot of high net worth individuals that are dumping land. Mm-hmm. Do you think that has anything to do with this? Or, I mean, not that I'm putting one together with the other, but if people think there's going to be a change, right? Do you think that they would want to get rid of pieces of land in order to maximize their investment at this point?
So we think that, depending on the election, if we have a president that is proposing increased tax rates, we are in a very tax beneficial situation currently. So if it turns that way, yeah, we're going to make our year-end planning typically is like accelerate deductions. Let's get those in, buy some. If you're going to buy equipment in the first couple of months of the year, let's buy it now. It would be opposite. If we think the tax rates are going to go up, it's get rid of your capital gains so you can have those at lower tax rate. It's accelerate income into this year. So it's really just trying to figure out what we think is going to happen and then have those conversations with our clients and see what we can do.
So, and Ryan, I was just thinking out loud, right? Just a second ago. Well, I'm gonna think out loud now because I was thinking quietly a minute ago. If Biden does win and they cut the inheritance thing in half, right? Like, does that mean that like Lizzie's going to try to kill you now so that she gets more stuff? Or does
I think she's going to be accelerating my deduction, if you will.
Well, I mean, thankfully, now's the opportunity. You still have, as we stand, the high lifetime exemption amount. There's some planning opportunities you can hopefully not have to kill your family members for, and maybe
It would be beneficial.
call your attorney and CPA and try to work through some of those ideas
Maybe not in that order.
Yeah.
So Diane, with this I mean, literally right now as we sit here and we're live and recording this at the same time, we don't know what's going to happen.
Right.
So in this sort of era of uncertainty, which I felt like we've been under for like last 7 months, but more so now as we get to the end of the year, what steps can we take? Do we wait and just hold out, see how the election goes? And I guess really I'm leading to the question of how quickly can a new presidential, let's say Biden wins, how fast can they shove in a new law and change tax code? Will it change tax code for 2021 or will it really be 2022?
Wow. And I'll jump in on that and say, because I'm following politics pretty closely lately, like it's fairly unlikely that Biden's going to get support in the Senate. So, I mean, he may be able to create some bipartisanship there, but I mean, he didn't take the Democrats didn't take that part. Right. So now you don't have a completely free reign to do whatever you want to do. So there's going to be some yin and yang there, I'm guessing, if anything gets passed, right?
Yeah. And typically tax legislation does not pass very quickly. The 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act, before that, I don't know. It was probably 1986. It was when I was in elementary school. That doesn't occur often. That being said, we have a lot of COVID legislation that was passed really quickly out of necessity. But it can happen. The likelihood is it typically doesn't happen and it will take some time.
Yeah. Well, and I'm glad you had mentioned COVID too, because the one thing I did want to touch on, just to kind of talk about the presidential season and stuff that people should be aware of that's going on, right, is when we talk about this all the time, so I'm going to harp on it again, is like there's always this sense of urgency that's going on out there, whether it's COVID, whether it's the election, right? Just 2020 has been, like I told Ryan the other day, like I'm out of adrenaline. Like I got no more.
They
like
make pills for that.
Yeah, those two hurricanes were coming together and they're like, we're going to get a Fujiwara. And I was like, whatever. Like, it's just two hurricanes. We'll figure it out. Come on, man. But like, so one of the things that we talk about with our clients all the time is something we've seen is that people are getting text messages that are like, your vote's in jeopardy. Make sure that you click on this link. Or they'll get a robocall from somewhere and somebody be like, hey, this is so-and-so with, the Harris County Election Official Society or whatever, and we're here to check on you about your vote, right? And all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, what's going on? And you call and they're like, I need your social security number. And you're like, okay, I want to make sure my vote counts. And so we just are telling people, like, just to touch on the election from the IT side of the house too, right? Because there's not like a whole lot of like application software or IT processes. But what we can say is that from a technology standpoint, people are using it to try to take advantage of our clients and our
I got one 2 days ago. Text message, click here to check your vote status. I'm like, well, I know I voted. I did it in person. I'm not going to click that link, especially, it's some, hidden URL thing. There's scams of many right now. And because they do, the bad actors are going to prey on our fear, uncertainty, and doubt. They have been through all of COVID. They have been through the election. So just think before you click, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, make sure you guys are on top of it and you're watching that sort of stuff too, because you can get in a whole lot of trouble. And tell other people that you love.
Right.
Like,
I have to tell my mother-in-law all the time, stop touching that.
Yeah.
That Nigerian prince that called you does not have $18 million for you, Mom.
Right.
Somebody like scammed one of my loved one's significant others. I don't want to embarrass them on a webinar, but they got a call and gave that person all of their login information. And then they went and changed all their login information to protect them. And then they were going to charge them like X number of dollars as a service to change it back. Like, it was bananas. And they got tricked. They got a phone call and they got tricked. So, but yeah, everybody just be careful, because there's always this sense of urgency that comes with these things where they're like, act now. Like we see it a lot with COVID tests, right? To get your COVID results, like, with the number of people getting tested, if you send that out to enough people, somebody's waiting for a COVID result, right? Same with elections, like with the number of turnout that happened this year, there's a lot of people that are concerned that maybe something happened and, you know, they got, you know, separated from their vote, so to speak. So just y'all be careful, right? Regardless of affiliation, politically, like it's just something we want everybody to be thinking about. And, you know, and one of the things I do want to we need to move on to our next topic, but one of the topics that we do want to cover and really kind of get into a little bit today is the information on where we stand from the legislation that Diane talked about too, which was the CARES Act and PPP. So Allison was going to kind of roll into that a little bit, and Ryan was going to help ask a few questions from ownership perspective that he and some of the folks in some of our peer groups had around PPP. So I'll turn it over to Allison to kind of give us a rundown on what it is that's going on there and what we need to be mindful of for next year.
Sure. Thank you, Andrew. So as most of you likely know, PPP stands for Payroll Protection Program. And as the name implies, it was a loan program that Congress passed as part of the CARES Act in March to help struggling businesses fund their payroll costs during these COVID shutdowns. And the unique part of the program was that a borrower could apply for partial or total loan forgiveness, which essentially converts the loan into a grant. And there was a mad rush, as most of you remember, to get one of these loans. There's a limited amount of funds available. It dried up pretty quickly in a matter of days, and then there was a round two. And with that, most people that wanted a PPP loan were able to get one eventually. So maybe not right away, but eventually got one. And the PPP program had some specific rules as to how you could spend those loan proceeds. At least 60% of it must be spent on payroll, and the remainder could be spent on mortgage interest, rent, or utilities. And there were a couple of other big limitations that could affect what you could be forgiven. And the first one is your employee headcount, and the second is the salary and wages of your employees. And essentially, to receive total loan forgiveness, you must keep, maintain, or restore your employee levels and their salaries to what they were before the pandemic began by the end of 2020. And so those were the rules, and for most of our clients now, they've spent the funds, and so we're shifting to really help them with their loan forgiveness application. So that's kind of where we're at right now.
And so how is that loan forgiveness application process working? Because I'll tell you from my experience, I'm getting the emails from my bank saying, hey, sign up. We've, you know, put in this software that's going to help with it. I've got, you know, Paychecks that does our payroll, and they've got all these reports and this estimator. I really honestly, you know, haven't dug into it because I'm kind of waiting. And I guess what's your opinion on, do you wait? Do you do it now? How's this process going to work? What fear, uncertainty, and doubt should I or should I not have?
Right. So that's such a great question. And, you know, I would say, one, you should be reaching out to your lender, because every bank has a different process when it comes to applying for loan forgiveness. So I would reach out to your lender, ask them what their process is like. The second piece of advice I would have is you need to keep in mind some specific dates, right? And knowledge is power, and you should do your, you know, look through your loan documents and figure out what's the date that you received the loan proceeds, the disbursement date, the date it came into your bank account. Look and, you know, figure out, you may already know what is the time period that you are choosing. You get, for most borrowers, get to choose between an 8-week all the way up to 24 weeks. This is called the covered period. So you get to, there is some flexibility in what length of time you are saying you're going to spend the PPP loans on. And so figure that out, right? Work through the math. And with the goal that you want to spend it all within that time period, right, on the appropriate types of expenses. And then once you know, and then the last day, you would need to figure out, so 10 months from the last day of your covered period is when you would have to start making payments, unless you've already applied for loan forgiveness. So know those dates, put them on your calendar. You know, you could rely on your lender, you can rely on your CPA, but at the end of the day, it's your loan, and you should at least know those dates, right? And then the next thing I would do is, even if you go to the SBA website, it's pretty good. I feel like it's it's very basic English when it comes to these rules. There's 3 different types of applications. So start to figure out, unless you get someone to help you, but figure out which application you're going to use. There is one for a simplified application for loans that are $50,000 or less, which was most of the loans in our country. So most borrowers get to use this simplified application, which is helpful in that those limitations about employee headcount and salary levels, those don't apply to you if your loan is $50,000 or less. Then there's an easy form if you're a sole proprietor with no employees, or again, if you're not subject to those limitations, you can use the easy form. And then of course there's the long form, which requires these detailed calculations by employee to figure out what you can receive forgiveness on. And so when it comes to timing, what the American Institute of CPAs is saying, what we also tend to agree with, is that it's best right now to start working on your application and get it ready, gather all the documentation that you have to gather to support the amounts you're putting on the forgiveness application, and get it ready to submit. And then you can determine at what point you want to submit it, right? So there might be some planning involved on timing, and we can get into that in a second. But for right now, you really should be focusing on let's start working on the application, figure out these dates, figure out what documentation do we have to support these numbers, so you're not doing it 10 months later and rushing at the last minute to get it in the door, right? So,
but it sounds like our drop dead is that 10-month mark, right? We want to get our application in.
I think you technically can apply for forgiveness up until the maturity date of the loan, but payments will start 10 months after the covered period. And so it's a little funny because you get to choose the covered period. So you have
that shifts the 10 months.
Exactly. So that's why knowing the dates is important. So that way you can make sure that you can get that maximum loan forgiveness if that's indeed what you're after, which most people are.
I mean, is anyone not after 100% forgiveness?
No.
So what happens if you don't qualify for 100% forgiveness? What goes on with the PPP after that? Like you get all the paperwork in, you've worked with your CPA firm, preferably ATKG, to figure all this out and get it into your bank or your loan. And the SBA came back after however long they have to decide, and we're going to only forgive 70%.
Right.
What then? The
remainder is a loan at a 1% interest rate. And if you received your PPP loan in that first round of PPP loans, you have a 2-year term. It's a 2-year loan. If you received a PPP loan after June 5th is the day that the PPP Flexibility Act was passed that did provide some flexibility in these rules, then you have 5 years. And one thing that I want to point out is that if you did receive a 2-year PPP loan and it looks like you might have to make payments on it, you won't be able to receive total forgiveness, you can go back to your banker and try to renegotiate the terms of the loan and try to get that longer period. So, that will definitely make payments easier if you have a longer term. So that's something you should consider if it looks like that's what's going to happen to you, which is why that planning right now is so important. Don't wait to the last minute. See what you can do now to put your business in a better position.
So we should spend as much money as we possibly can on stuff. Like how does this work?
Hey, whoa. A really wise accountant once told me, never spend $1 to save 37 cents.
So let's go out and buy like new computers with all the PPP money.
Calm down.
Right. No, you can't quite do that. The loan was really geared towards payroll. And even then, payroll is a broad term. There's some specific rules regarding how much payroll per employee you can spend or you can be forgiven on. And then there's also rules for mortgage, interest, rent, and utilities. So it's pretty specific. You can't just go drop the cash on computers. I feel like most of our clients are using it for payroll. You can choose to use all of it on payroll. You don't have to use it on anything but payroll, but at least 60% must be used on payroll. And then what's interesting, the hot topic right now is the deductibility of these expenses.
I was just about to ask that because it came up in a conversation earlier this week with some other business owner friends of mine, and there seems to be a lot of misinformation.
Yes. So to give you some context, when the CARES Act was passed in March, the bill stated that when a borrower is forgiven on its PPP loan, that forgiveness of debt is not taxable to them, right? Ordinarily, a cancellation of a debt would be treated as taxable income to you. But in the case of PPP, it's not, which is great. However, a month later, the IRS issued a notice that said that any expenses that are paid with using forgiven PPP funds are non-deductible, which, I think some expected the IRS to say that because it's, this.
It would be double dipping, right? I mean,
And that's exactly how the IRS.
I'm anti-double taxation. I should also be anti-free money.
Right. And so, immediately some congressmen came out and said, that was not the intention of the CARES Act. They had intended for those deductions to remain deductible. And so there is a bill that was submitted, I believe, in the Senate to rectify what the IRS said. However, given the turmoil that we're in right now, I don't know if that's going to see the light of day. There are CPAs that have hope that that's going to be fixed, which again goes back to let's get those forgiveness applications completed, pull our documentation, and then let's wait and see what happens, because some of the uncertainty, you talked about fear and uncertainty and the unknown. What we don't know is which taxable year do you have to show these expenses as non-deductible.
I was about to ask that.
Right.
As we were talking with Diane earlier, like we've got end of year planning coming up. I know I'm looking at it going, I've got
change in tax rates, right? So these are all questions that you need to look at. And is it 2020, the year that you pay for the expenses with PPP funds, or is it 2021, the year that most borrowers are going to find out whether their loan was forgiven or not? And so we don't know that, right? So it's kind of working through that with your CPA. And then of course, if worst case scenario, those are non-deductible, you should be factoring that in when you're working on your 2020 taxable income estimates and trying to budget for what the check you're going to have to cut in April. I've been factoring that in, worst case scenario, this is what you're going to have to pay. If Congress gets their act together and passes this bill, well, then it's good news, right? But I'd rather give my clients good news than tell them bad news in April that, hey, I forgot these expenses are non-deductible and you owe more money now. So definitely something you should be talking about with your CPA.
It sounds complicated and still no real questions answered as far from the government. Like they can still change the rules. I think that's why I was super I was living and breathing PPP at the beginning, right? Rushing around. I was all into it, right? It was like my only job for I felt like months.
Yeah.
And then I just got burned out on it because they kept changing the goalpost.
Right. They did.
I'm like, all right, I have no idea what's going to happen. Like, I can't do tax planning. Is this expense deducted this year, or is the forgiveness going to be next year? And then with a potential new administration, new tax laws like Diane talked about, well, holy heck.
Right.
I mean, do I want the deduction this year or next year? Now that just changed.
Right.
So I'm going to pull this axe off the back and I'll see you guys later.
Well, and then you've got, the other thing that's kind of weird too, is that any companies that we know that had to either lay off or furlough employees and eliminate positions, then as the economy picks back up, how does that work into the forgiveness, right? Because there's been a lot of, 13 million people still don't have jobs, right? So there's a lot of that going on too, right?
Right. Yes. So you're supposed to restore your head count to what it was pre-pandemic by the end of the year, but that's easier said than done for some businesses, right? If you don't have revenue coming in, it's really hard to hire employees back. So you have to, it doesn't mean that you can't receive forgiveness of some amount. It just might reduce the amount that you can receive forgiveness on.
Or do you think a lot of people are going to hire people on the 30th of December for 2 days?
I don't know.
Yeah. I think what we found was that I think businesses made decisions that they had to make at the time, right? Like they tried to keep people on, but then they made the decisions of what they had to do. And then when all those decisions were done, I think like you were saying earlier, Ryan, and as my dad used to always say, it's not worth it to step over the dollars to get to the dimes, right? And then you've got this issue with whether there's going to be this level of forgiveness because of the changing goalpost, right? And as the climate has changed and the political tolerances have changed and all that sort of stuff, like keeping somebody on staff to maybe get forgiven a percentage of more than you might have gotten forgiven before versus right-sizing your business. I think a lot of people are just going to unfortunately right-size their business, right? If they had to.
And some people want to apply. I've had some clients that have already applied for forgiveness because they just want this behind them. They don't want to have to worry about PPP anymore. They just want it done. They want that paid in full statement, and they don't want to worry about it anymore. So, you shouldn't let tax drive every decision that you make, but you should at least understand the consequences of your decision when you're making them, which is what we try to do with our clients. The pros and cons of waiting or just doing it now and what that means for your business. But you're right in that you shouldn't let tax drive every decision that you make.
Well,
and I know that I always look forward to Brian's call on about April 10th. and the first thing he says is, "Are you sitting down?"
Sounds about right. Except this year.
No, this year he said the same thing. I was like, "Oh, this is going to be bad."
Well, okay. So I had like a question about getting paid in full, right? So typically there is some sort of option that the government, I'm guessing, offers, because I'm ignorant on this subject. So like if you were to file all this stuff, isn't there like a later amendment that you could potentially file if they change the law on you later? Like anybody who's already done this process, they will have some sort of like backdoor for you. So if they decide to January 24th or something after the new administration comes in or the Trump administration takes back over or whatever, and they make some new change to CARES repayment, like wouldn't there be something normally like where you could say, if you've already get this?
I would think so. And I know if you don't typically extend your tax return, you might want to consider doing that this year, just so you don't have to deal with the trouble of amending. I mean, you could always amend it if you realize that the position that you put was probably, you could have put something different. But if you're using a CPA, that's more fees you have to pay a CPA to amend it, right? It'd probably be cheaper just to extend it and wait to see what happens. But I'm sure that at the end of the day, if something happens where the rules change and people have already filed for loan forgiveness, I'm sure there's going to be something to fix it. But fixing it normally involves some sort of expense. So we try to keep things as efficient as possible so you don't have to do that. But
yeah, I think my biggest takeaway here is if you're not using a CPA, especially during PPP and COVID, you got to have experts at the table. Like there's too many moving parts here for just an individual to keep track of.
Right. Well, and furthermore, I think knowing your banker in times of crisis is so important. I had some clients that were trying to apply for PPP loans through a national bank and didn't have their phone calls or their emails returned. And so I was able to get them in contact with some local bankers that I know and trust, and we were able to eventually get them a PPP loan. But I think the importance of knowing your trusted advisors and actually being able to trust them will help you get through times of crisis. And I've seen banking relationships shift because of that. People want that local banker, want that local CPA, want that local IT consultant that they can call and say, hey, help me, I'm in trouble and I need your help and I trust you and help me get through this, right? So that's one of the biggest lessons I've learned too, Brian.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I have so many friends that were with one of the not to be named national banks that had changed over the entire PPP kerfuddle. They went to a community bank. I mean, we've been with the community bank for years, and love and cherish that relationship because it's local. I can walk in, well, not with COVID, but could in theory walk in, but I can text the banker. I know them personally. They've been there for years versus here's a 1-800 number.
Right.
Yeah.
That didn't help a lot of very small businesses.
Right.
Unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and one of the things that's happened because of this pandemic that I do want to touch on, we had talked about, employees and kind of having to make changes. So one of the things that we've noticed, we have onboarded 2 new employees remotely. So we're in a really interesting situation as an organization. Our offices are headquartered in Houston. We have offices in San Antonio too, but we've prepared ourselves for, I grew up in my career, started in bioterrorism defense and the Bureau of Epidemiology. And so one of the things that you used to tell me that would scare the hell out of me was one day there will be a pandemic. And I'm like, oh, whatever that means. Right. And they would beat this into my head, and the FBI would always say that's the worst thing that could ever happen to this country. And so, we fought our way through anthrax scares, and we fought our way through hurricanes and all this other stuff. But as Iron Edge evolved over the last 15 years and the 10 years I've been here, we've built this response plan of being able to be remote, which was cool when Harvey happened for us because we were able to be remote. And it's one thing to be remote for a couple of weeks, but it's another thing to be remote for 9 months. So the boat at the time wasn't built for that. And so as we've been evolving over the last 6 months, we've learned there are things that are different about our company, and we've had to change our processes accordingly to learn how to deal with those things. And one of the things I think is really important from an IT perspective is, like, one of the simple things that we hadn't considered before was, how do we get HR paperwork filled out if the person doesn't come into the office? So we're like, okay, so we're contacting our PEO. We're trying to figure out how to get it done electronically, right? We're trying to figure out what technologies work in order for us to communicate more effectively. Like, I was talking to AJ on our pre-call, and we're talking about Teams, right? And I think we'll get into that a little bit later about risk and distractions and stuff. But, like, people are going to have to figure out, like, as you move towards a place where your employees are now not in your office, and you're onboarding new employees and you're offboarding employees, you've got operational changes that have happened, and maybe that tribal knowledge isn't there anymore. The pop in, the walk up, the walk by, the training of a new team member, the extraction of the, as we say, the tribal knowledge from the old employee to get it into the new employees, or the person that's now wearing 3 hats, right?
You just don't send them over to the other person's living room to shadow?
Oh my God, wouldn't that be awkward?
A little weird. Hey, I'm coming over for brunch.
I tried to do that to Mark the other day. It was his 10-year anniversary, and I showed up with, like, a really nice bottle of booze, and I just kind of sat in his front yard for about 10 minutes. And then I finally texted him. I was like, come outside. And he was all, why are you here? And I was like, maybe I have violated a trust. Maybe I should not have come by.
It is strange, though. I mean, you're hiring people. You're adding new staff. You're FedExing computers back and forth now, instead of just, hey, come into the office and here's your new station. Like, sorry, you don't have a station at all. You're working from your home office. It's been a very interesting adjustment.
Well, there's like the way that we talked about it was, we wanted to make sure that when the way that we talked about it in the office was, we called it burning the boats, right? So when we say by that is, we had to make a very specific decision as an organization that we weren't going to continue to try to do what we did in the office remotely. We were going to have to actually change our processes in order to be a more efficient team, right? And that was really the game changer for us. Like, because I remember, one of the things that Ryan talked about a lot at the very beginning, and he was like, this isn't going to work. We're going to have to go back. Like, this is good temporarily, but this is not going to work permanently, right? And so I think it was really important for us to finally tell everybody, get used to this. Stop waiting to get back to the office, right? And then once people started to adopt those processes, then it got better, right? Because then people weren't holding on to their work anymore. But we found that there was a lot that companies should do, because this may not be the only time this sort of thing happens, right? And if you're in a 3 or 5 or 10-year plan with your business, right, or as a leader, you should be prepared for these sorts of weird disruptions and be able to be remote. And here's the other interesting thing. Like, now that you've got 13 million people that are unemployed, one of the things that I found recently in trying to pick up new employees is that the people that have jobs have them for a reason, and they're not going to go anywhere. And you're going to have to entice them to come work for you. And one of the things they're looking for is being able to work remotely, or at least some. Yeah. Like, not just for like, it's like, hey, can I work remotely 4 days a week, 5 days a week?
And
Right.
and we're addressing that as a firm. You can see us, all 3 of us are in the office right now, but we're not going to go back to the way we did things before. So what does that look like? And what do we want it to look like? And, the world's our oyster. We could do whatever.
Yeah.
Andrew, something you said about being prepared, and given your background, you were kind of drilled into your head to be prepared for these kinds of things. But, until they happen, it's kind of hard to prepare for something you've never experienced. And I have to tell Ryan, thank you a lot, because before this happened, we had just upgraded our servers through Iron Edge. And so again, thank you, Ryan.
Yes, thank you.
And as a result,
It worked okay.
When we had done that, though, we had built in some capacity to work out of the office into our system. So, we do that because we thought, we'd be working from home for 9 months? No, but we just felt like that, we could see the potential for it.
Mm-hmm.
So when we shut our offices down pretty early, sent everybody home, and boy, we really tested the system pretty quickly.
Right.
And we adopted new things. Teams became a pretty big part of our process to meet and discuss and collaborate and whatnot. And it worked. It's worked well. And it's funny. I think you alluded to it, that it's not like one day when we're back to normal, we'll never use it again. I think we have seen the value in it, and that it's going to become part of our, our daily process from here on out. I mean, there's some efficiencies we've gained to it, but there's some times where I think, like today, we're in the office and there's reasons for that, but there's other times where, wow, this Teams or Zoom or whatever, is much more efficient than past, where I had to drive all the way across town for a short meeting. This, now I can see my client or prospect or whatnot, vendor, face to face through this. But there's those processes on how, we take care of business. But, one thing I wanted to visit on today, and I hope right now is the right time to bring it up, is just from the aspect of, a business of size typically that has multiple people in their accounting department has internal controls. And those internal controls are established specifically to prevent, hopefully prevent fraud, hopefully to give you good, reliable financial statements in a timely basis. You segregate your duties to keep everybody not being able to manipulate the system. And so those systems are still, the backbone of how businesses are operating, but because of, okay, everybody's got to work from home, you're not an essential worker, this stuff, and Andrew, I'm borrowing your term, but it's created this distributed workforce.
I wish I could take credit for it. I appreciate the
You're
guy
the first
who,
that I heard say it. So that's
I'll interject on that real quick. So this was fascinating. So like the first month of it, my buddy turned me on to a podcast, which I alluded to in March, from the owner of the guy who founded WordPress. He actually lives in Houston, and his term for distributed is actually great because the connotation of it isn't that there's a central location that everybody is remotely away from. It means that decisions are made in almost like a hive system, where you can distribute out everybody, and that there's not necessarily one central system, so that you can delegate responsibilities and thought processes and stuff. But it changes every process that you do, because if you try to run it like a remote system, it doesn't function right.
Right. Well, and the going to that distributed model, well, how does that affect me as a business owner in my internal controls? I mean, and so it's something that, and I'm not sure where everyone's business is at this stage. I mean, like, we're all in the office today, but some businesses might not have that luxury, or they are back in the office. And I think for considering all these new things with, PPP, or what's tax code going to be, I think I just want to walk away from this reminding people, don't forget these other things that are really day to day that we've had for a long time. And because we've been disrupted, don't forget that there were processes in place to make sure and provide integrity to accounting systems. Like a lot of times, and I'm sure all of us are like this, particularly when we were dispersed, it was like, well, we still need to make sure the work's getting done. So we start cutting corners in a way of, well, I normally would have done it this way, but because Diane's over there and Allison's over there, I've got to do it this other way.
Or longer there, right? To the point. Not nobody was called, but like if you had to let somebody go, now you're wearing 3 hats as a small business.
Exactly owner, right? So, that one bookkeeper who's by herself now, who had 4 other people doing data entry, and all this reliance is on that one person. And now we all need to be taking a breather and stepping back and saying, okay, what kind of compromises to my system have occurred? And each business has to evaluate, can I rehire those people back? Or what things do I need to put in place? Because, you know, some business may have contracted. Maybe I don't need those additional 4 people, but I need to modify the system that was tracking my accounting information, though, as a result. You know, one thing that I'm big about is, you know, internal controls. And so I want to make sure, to the extent you have the capacity in your workforce, that the duties are segregated. Now, many businesses are small and they have that one, you know, office manager that's doing everything. And of course, you have to work with what you have. But there are things even in that environment that I would hope before COVID you had set up just to make sure those accounting processes were happening appropriately, and you were getting your reporting timely, and you had trust that the money was getting to the bank, and you had trust disbursements were happening timely, and your vendors were happy and your customers were happy. And that's where, you know, here we're thinking about the end of the year and just kind of breathing. I know for us 10/15 just happened, so we're all breathing much more calmly now.
Wasn't it 9/15 then 10/15? I was waiting for an 11/15 tax deadline just for
yeah,
you.
well, it was 7/15, which was new this year, and then 9/15, then 10/15. There is actually 11/15. There is no 12/15. There is a January 15, but
Never a dull moment.
Oh yeah, you know, if you ever feel like you want to be a CPA, come on over. I know IT doesn't bring all those exciting things, right? So,
Well,
but
AJ, you had mentioned too. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Finish what your
go
thought
for it.
was. Well, I was going to say that one of the things that you talked about, process and controls, right? I'm gonna let everybody behind the curtain a little bit about what goes on in the head of an IT consultant when this happens, or an IT manager. Somebody that has something to do with bookkeeping in a company gets pwned, and they wind up sending a bunch of money someplace it's not supposed to go. And the first thing that happens is all of the people come and they start breathing down the IT department's neck and going, how could you let this happen? And my first question was, where's your internal control that says if they asked to change the account number, you picked up the phone and called them and confirmed verbally? I can't fix that. Right? IT can't fix that. And I think that that's something that's really important for people to understand, is that, like, when you talk about controls in a distributed workforce, like, sometimes it's just simply stuff that they do to, like, remember to get on a video chat or to, like, pick up the phone, right?
Yeah. Yeah. But it's those controls, you know, like what you just mentioned, something we take seriously at our firm, because we get phishing occasionally, and we have systems that y'all help us design and put in place to kind of minimize those. But nonetheless, sometimes those things come through, and I'll spare all the details. I know Ryan could probably geek out on that. But the point being, though, is we try to train our people regularly. Just because you get something that looks normal for the most part, there's always tends to be something in those emails that looks a little off. And, you know, our IT guy, Tate, has trained us to hover over those hyperlinks first, and just to make sure that that's not taking you to some crazy unknown place, or just delete it if you're not sure. So, you know, going back to controls, you know, it's that first control is training our people to recognize when that happens. But if I'm the AP person, you know, there needs to be a verification process before I go changing routing numbers to something. And again, I think when in this disruptive environment we've been in, it's easy we're just trying to make business happen. And so we start to kind of lose track of that. And that's why where we're at right now, it's really a good time to take a step back, figure out where, you know, you might need to shore things back up to where they were, or even if you're faced with that new reality, well, hey, we're not coming all back to the office. You know, my office manager now, because her child still hasn't gone back to school, has to be working from home. Let's sit down and make sure, you know, let's look at what existing controls we had in place, processes and procedures, and let's modify them and still accomplish the protocols necessary to keep everything intact, for sure.
I don't think,
I think that's critical. There's been a ton of like stuff, just talking with some of our clients, of situations where, and it can even be low tech. I love to talk about phishing emails and hovering over stuff, and Tate's exactly right. All great practice, everybody should do. But you get a letter in the mail from, you know, one of your vendors that you pay regularly saying, hey, our account details have changed. Please update your ACH information. Do you have a process and a control to call and verify with someone you know? Not the number on the piece of paper that showed up in the mail magically and happens to look like their letterhead, but their actual number that you've called before, you have a contact there. These guys are crafty. It's all about the money. And so it's so easy to lose sight of some of those processes and controls that you guys had in place in the office. Now you've shifted, distributed, and we're hitting the easy button. And it's a great time of year, as you said, AJ, and you can't reiterate it enough, to take a step back and, okay, let's reevaluate where we've cut those corners. Some of them out of necessity. Okay, well, how do we shore those up? How do we fix this so that we're not setting ourselves up for, pain and suffering in 2021? Let's go into the new year, new you.
Well, one of the things that we talked about, like that the slide alluded to, is distractions, right? So when you're distributed or when things are different, right? One of the things that I recommend as an organization, and it looks like, and I have personally not been to ATKG's offices in the San Antonio market. As soon as COVID is over, I will definitely swing by.
I'm still waiting on them to put in the margarita machine.
But it looks like, from the background that I'm seeing back there, that they like to have nice offices, right? To keep their employees comfortable and productive, right? We had spent money on our offices too. So, cause we wanted to have a neat place for people to come work. We had like a foosball table and we had stuff, right? And it was cool. And we had free beer on Friday. So here's all these things that we did, but to try to create a comfortable and productive environment. When everybody goes home and you've got all these different distractions, I don't think companies who are seriously thinking about distributed workforce a lot of them aren't taking the time to really understand how to train their employees to create a professional and comfortable space in their homes, and then actually incorporating those into their employee handbooks, right? So if you're going to be remote, then you have to have a dedicated workspace, not your kitchen table that people are coming in and out of the room, right? Where people are, oh, hey, sorry guys, like, my kids are cooking right now and I'm going to be on this call. Like if you can, in a room with a door that you can close, not everybody's got that luxury, but if you do, a place that's quiet, right? A place where you can get your work done, that you can minimize your outside distractions. And then the other thing, aside from having a workspace, is knowing your boundaries and communicating that to your team and your family, right? And working through those things with one another to be able to say, listen, buddy, like I love you, but for the next 2 hours, I need you to be here so that I can get this done. And that's hard. That's hard. And then
I apologize for calling during dinner. I did. I just can't.
I say, listen, Ryan. But we have a tendency to think, like, because some of my team members will tell me that, like, I walk past my computer and I feel guilty I'm not working, and it's like 7:00 at night. I'm like, dude, like, I tell them, I'm like, if you're the luxury of what I call time shifting, if your work is 8 hours, but it doesn't matter when you get it done, as long as you get it done, then I don't care. Like, get it done. Like, if you log on at 8 and work till noon and then take 3.5 hours to do personal stuff and then work till, from 5 to 9 that night, and that's a good routine for you, make sure that you have it blocked off in your calendar so we know when we can communicate. But anything that people can do to start creating less distractions in the way that they work, I think is really important, because it's going to eliminate burnout. It's going to provide less options for people to get freaked when something weird or different or urgent, which, as AJ alluded to, is always the hallmark of a good scam, comes through. It gives them the ability to take a minute to be thoughtful about what they're doing. So I've
started getting back in the car and just commuting around 410 and then back to my house, just to have that breakup between work and home.
That's awesome.
Hey, Andrew, there was one more thing I wanted to hit on, because when we talked earlier in the week, it came out and I thought it was critical. And Allison brought it up when she mentioned relationships with your bankers, with your CPAs.
Yeah.
And that was keeping those channels open, even with your people, making sure we're talking to them and knowing where they're at. And again, going back to sort of where, what I like to do with internal controls and risk assessments is, when we consider what the mechanics of fraud are, one of the big ones there is opportunity, and another one's just having the motivation or pressure to do something. And given everyone's situation, if they're distributed, or if their spouse has lost their job, or their kids have gotten sick, or they've lost a loved one even, there's lots and lots of pressure out there as a result of what we've been going through lately. So, in order for us to know that those warning signs are there, we really need to be talking to our people. particularly that office manager who's wearing 3 hats. The last thing I would want is to find out after the fact either that she had or he or she had issues at home, and then I gave her so much responsibility that she was able to, or there she had potential to say, well, I'm just going to take a little bit out of petty cash this month. And as we all know, as we know, those types of things snowball. But it's real easy when we're distributed, and I'm not seeing people in my office. It's easy to forget. And I know at our firm, we make a conscious effort to reach out, not only just to our clients, but to our people regularly, just to know where they're at, how they're doing. And that will go a long way from keeping things straight.
Well, in AJ, you bring up a good point in that, like, what I've noticed is I have to be deliberate with my team, right? I've got a couple of people on my team. Sorry, Ruben. Ruben's one of them. I'll just call myself out on it. Like, I don't check in with Ruben very often because Ruben usually does a really good job, and I see him in a couple of meetings every week. Most everybody else I have one-on-ones with, right? Not that they're not doing as good a job as Ruben. That's not what I mean. It's just like I'm trying to be very deliberate, right, as a manager, because I know I can't walk over. I can't have lunch with them. Used to, that was my time. Like Ruben and I would go to lunch like 2-3 times a week, and it would be our chance to catch up. How are things going? What's going on with the family, right? And the one-on-ones I'm having now weekly, it always either starts or ends with, we get through business and we say, like, all right, how are things? What'd you do last night, right? You have a good week? Like, what's going on? Then you'd be surprised because we do mandatory video, right? Some firms on remote didn't do it or haven't done it. I catch so much more by being able to see the person on the other side, because I can tell that they don't look good, that they're stressed out, that, they've got something that's going on with them that just, I'm like, okay, like maybe we should take some time, or telling them, hey, listen, I know you think you have to work all the time because it's crazy right now, but I need you to take Monday off. Like, just take Monday off. The work will be here. I get it, but just take it off. Because if you don't, you're no good to anybody. Like, spend some time with your family. Like, don't worry about the computer that sits there. Right. And I think that's to your point. I think it's like super important just to know what's going on with everybody, because then whether or not the new normal is affecting them.
Yeah.
Right. Which affects your business.
Yeah.
But more so the people. Make sure that they're in a good spot.
How do you maintain culture when you're not sitting next to each other anymore and having a holiday party? Which I think everyone's canceled their holiday parties this year at this point, because who knows what's going to happen. But we got to do our best to do it, which is totally separate of tax and accounting, but still relevant, because it's all about the day-to-day business and planning for the new year. How are you going to maintain company culture? Maybe that's a whole nother webinar. We'll get on.
I want to talk about it too. Like, I think we should, because I'm like, you and I talked about it. If we wind up being in a situation down the road where we can choose a different configuration of our office space, where we're more logistically focused and not necessarily all in an office, you can take the money you're not spending on that stuff and use it to do in-person events, both large and small scale, right? Which that guy talks about in his podcast, right? It's just basically like everybody gets together and does like a 2-day at a hotel, right? And they do some, and all of us have been to, this is the part that got me. He's like, everybody's been to a conference, right? And those people you see twice a year at a conference and you spend 3 days with, where you're just like intense and you're talking about like super important stuff that's like specific to your industry or what you do, and you have dinners and you go out drinking and you share some laughs or whatever. Sometimes those relationships are almost stronger than the ones that you have where you take for granted the person you walk into and see every single day and talk to for 15 minutes at the water cooler. And he's like, if you can replicate that in your culture, he's like, then you start to really see how a distributed workforce can help. Right.
So I know that we've talked a lot about multiple subjects today, bouncing around a little bit, which is exciting. That's kind of the format we're going for, more of a conversation. But wanted to open up the floor to any questions from our attendees. There's a lot of you out there. There's a Q&A button, I believe, on your Zoom link. And feel free to fire away. Ask the experts, as we like to say.
Or at least everybody at ATKG. I can't speak for Iron Edge Group. I don't know how much we know.
That's who I was talking about.
Yeah. Ask the experts. Wow, that ATKG is Ask the Knowledgeable Guys or Gals group.
Where does it say that?
ATKG is what it stands for.
Ask the Knowledgeable Group. I love it.
Ask the Knowledgeable Group.
That's
That is
perfect.
great. That's a first. We love that.
I'm the best at cheesy marketing. Super cheesy marketing. Well, nobody has any questions. Apparently, we are really good at this. So, well, we want to thank everybody for joining us on the webinar today. Hopefully, you learned something. You were slightly entertained. At least we hopefully distracted you from staring mindlessly at numbers creep up your
Doom
screen on your
scrolling on
computer.
Facebook or Twitter.
Yeah. So hopefully, all those things turned out.
You've turned off the news for at least an hour, saved yourself a little bit of mental sanity.
Yeah. But if you have any interest in any of the things that we talked about today, or you're, want to learn more about either of our organizations, we'll be sending out links to blog posts where we've got a webinar recap and information on how to communicate with us. If you're already a client, hopefully you know who to go to within your organization to reach out and reach out to your account manager or your support team and get to know what it is that we were talking about today. But I really want to thank everybody over at ATKG, Allison, Diane, AJ, just an amazing group of folks over there have been fantastic clients of ours, and just really receptive to the things that we bring up. And you guys were fantastic today on the call. We appreciate it so much.
A lot of great information, guys.
Awesome. Well, thank you all again. And hopefully we'll have a chance to catch up again soon. Have a great rest of your week, and we will talk to you all later. Bye, everybody. See you.
Bye.